It was a cold, cloudy afternoon, the kind where the wind bites at your skin and the weight of the world feels heavier than usual. Mark, a successful millionaire who had everything anyone could ever dream of, was feeling emptier than ever. He walked towards the grave of his late wife Sarah, in the peaceful cemetery that he'd visited so many times. He felt a familiar lump forming in his throat. He hadn't missed a single day since she passed, and even though it had been over a year, the pain hadn't faded. If anything, it felt worse. But today was different. As Mark approached Sarah's grave, his eyes caught sight of something unusual. A little boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, stood there, his small hands clutching a worn-out teddy bear, his eyes red and puffy, as if he'd been crying for hours. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Who was this boy? And why was he standing at his wife's grave, of all places? Mark felt an uneasy curiosity grow within him. The boy's clothes were ragged, his shoes barely held together, and he looked out of place in the pristine cemetery. Mark, who had grown used to a life of luxury and comfort, couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt seeing the boy's state. But more than that, he felt a strange connection, a pull towards the child that he couldn't explain. "Hey, kid," Mark said softly, trying not to startle him. The boy turned slowly, his tear-streaked face showing a mixture of surprise and fear. Mark crouched down to be at his level. "What are you doing here?" The boy hesitated, glancing back at the gravestone, as if it held some secret only he knew. Mark followed his gaze and saw his wife's name, etched in stone, Sarah Thompson, beloved wife and mother. Mother! The word hit Mark like a ton of bricks. He had no children, at least none that he knew of. "Did you know my wife?" Mark asked, gently, trying to keep his voice calm, though inside, his mind was racing. The boy nodded slowly, clutching the teddy bear even tighter. "Who are you?" Mark asked again, his voice trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it. There was something about this boy that made his skin crawl in the most unsettling way. The boy sniffled and wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. His voice was small and shaky when he finally spoke. She used to come and see me." Mark's breath caught in his throat. He felt his heart pound louder, his palms beginning to sweat. What did the boy mean? How could Sarah have known? This child? A million questions buzzed in his head, none of them making any sense. "She came to see you." "When?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He tried to stay composed, but he could feel his chest tightening. The boy looked down at his feet, shuffling them awkwardly. "She came to the orphanage. She used to bring me food and toys, and she'd read me stories." Mark's knees nearly buckled. Orphanage? Sarah had never mentioned anything about visiting an orphanage. She had never told him about this boy. Why would she keep this a secret from him? Mark felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, confusion, sadness. His mind couldn't wrap around the idea that his wife, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had a whole part of her life he knew nothing about. "Why didn't she tell me?" Mark muttered to himself. More than to the boy, he stared at the grave, trying to make sense of everything. He thought back to the last few months of Sarah's life. She had been distant, often leaving the house for hours, without telling him where she was going. He had assumed she was just taking time for herself, grieving over the fact that they couldn't have children of their own. But now it seemed like there was so much more she hadn't shared with him. Did she tell you anything else?" "About me?" Mark asked, his voice now almost pleading. He needed answers, and this boy seemed to be the only person who could give them to him. The boy looked up, his wide, innocent eyes locking onto Mark's. For a moment, Mark saw something in those eyes, something that looked like a reflection of Sarah herself. "She said you're a good man," the boy whispered, "but she was sad. She wanted to tell you something, but she couldn't. She said you wouldn't understand." Mark's stomach twisted into knots. What wouldn't he understand? What had Sarah been hiding? He felt a wave of guilt wash over him. Had he made her feel like she couldn't be honest with him? What could be so terrible that she felt the need to keep it a secret? As Mark stood there, staring at the boy and then at his wife's grave, the wind howled through the cemetery, carrying with it a heavy silence. His mind was clouded with thoughts, memories, and now, secrets. This boy wasn't just here by accident. He had a connection to Sarah, a connection that Mark was only just beginning to uncover. Before Mark could ask anything else, the boy took a step back, as if sensing the intensity of the moment. "I have to go now," he said softly, looking down at the teddy bear in his hands. Mark watched helplessly as the boy turned and started to walk away, disappearing into the distance, leaving Mark with more questions than answers. He stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to do next. What had Sarah been hiding? Why did she never tell him about this boy? And what did the boy mean when he said that Sarah thought Mark wouldn't understand? As Mark looked back at the gravestone, the words "mother" seemed to echo in his mind. Could it be possible? Could this boy be? The thought sent chills down Mark's spine. He didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he knew that the truth was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The boy had left, but the mystery had only just begun. Mark stood frozen in place, long after the boy had disappeared from sight. The words the child had spoken kept echoing in his mind. She said, "You wouldn't understand." What could Sarah have meant by that? He looked down at her grave, feeling a wave of emotions hit him all at once. Confusion, anger, sadness, guilt. He thought he knew everything about his wife, but it seemed there were secrets she had taken with her to the grave. As Mark walked back to his car, his mind raced. He couldn't just leave it like this. He needed answers, and he needed to find out who that boy was. He hadn't caught the boy's name, but there was one thing that stuck with him: the orphanage. That was the clue he needed to follow. The next day, Mark decided to visit the local orphanage. He had never been there before, despite living in the town for years. It wasn't a part of his world. His world was one of wealth, business, and power. But now, as he pulled up to the small run-down building, he felt a sense of unease. What had Sarah been doing here? Why had she come to this place without telling him? The orphanage director, a kind-looking older woman named Mrs. Bennet, greeted Mark with a cautious smile. She seemed surprised to see someone like him, a well-dressed man who clearly didn't belong in a place like this. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked politely. Mark hesitated for a moment before speaking. I'm looking for a boy. He was at my wife's grave yesterday. He said she used to visit him here." Mrs. Bennet's expression softened. "Ah, you must be talking about Timmy." "Timmy?" Mark repeated, feeling a small sense of relief that he finally had a name. "Yes, I think that's him." "Can you tell me more about him?" "My wife, Sarah. She never mentioned him to me." Mrs. Bennet nodded slowly, gesturing for Mark to follow her inside. As they walked through the dimly lit halls of the orphanage, she began to explain. Sarah was a kind woman. She started coming here about a year before she passed. She never said much about herself, but it was clear she cared deeply for the children. Timmy was her favorite. Mark's chest tightened. He had always known Sarah had a big heart. But why hadn't she told him about this part of her life? "Timmy doesn't have any family," Mrs. Bennet continued. "He's been here since he was a baby. He's a sweet boy, but he's been through A lot. Sarah took a special interest in him. She used to bring him little gifts, like that teddy bear you probably saw him with. She'd read him stories and spend hours just talking to him. She was like a mother to him. Those words hit Mark like a punch to the gut. She was like a mother to him. The inscription on Sarah's grave, "Beloved wife and mother," suddenly made sense. She hadn't been a mother to their child, but to Timmy. Mark felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been so wrapped up in his own world, in their struggles to have children of their own, that he hadn't noticed what Sarah had been doing. She had found a way to be a mother, just not in the way he had expected. But why had she kept this from him? Why hadn't she told him about Timmy? "Why didn't she tell me?" Mark asked, more to himself than to Mrs. Bennet. Mrs. Bennet gave him a sympathetic look. "I can't speak for her, but I think she was trying to protect you. She knew how much you wanted children of your own, and maybe she didn't want to hurt you by showing you what she had found here." Mark felt his throat tighten. Had Sarah really kept this from him out of love? Had she been trying to spare him pain, even as she built this secret connection with Timmy? "Can I see him?" Mark asked quietly. "I need to talk to him." Mrs. Bennet nodded and led him to a small room where Timmy was sitting, quietly playing with his teddy bear. When the boy saw Mark, his eyes widened in surprise. But he didn't run. Instead, he just sat there, waiting for Mark to speak. "Hi, Timmy," Mark said gently, kneeling down to be at eye level with the boy. I want to talk to you about Sarah." Timmy's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her name, and he clutched the teddy bear tightly. "I miss her," he whispered, his voice trembling. Mark's heart broke at the sight of the boy's pain. He reached out a hand, resting it on Timmy's small shoulder. "I miss her too," he said softly. "I didn't know about you, Timmy. I didn't know she was coming to see you." Timmy looked up at Mark with wide, innocent eyes. "She didn't want to make you sad," he said quietly. "She said you were already sad because you couldn't have a baby. She didn't want to make it worse." Mark swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. "She told you that?" Timmy nodded. "She said she loved you very much, but she wanted to help me too. She said I needed her." Mark closed his eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the emotions that were threatening to overwhelm him. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own desires, that he hadn't realized what Sarah had been doing. She had found a way to help someone who needed her, someone who had no one else, and she had done it out of love for both him and Timmy. As Mark sat there with Timmy, he realized that this boy wasn't just a reminder of what he and Sarah couldn't have. He was a part of Sarah's legacy, a part of her heart that she had left behind. And now it was up to Mark to decide what to do next. The weight of the decision hung in the air between them. Could he take on the responsibility that Sarah had so quietly taken on? Could he be there for Timmy in the way Sarah had been? Mark didn't know the answer yet, but as he looked into Timmy's eyes, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. The conflict that had been brewing in his heart was now coming to a head. What had started as a mystery at Sarah's grave had led him to this moment, where he would have to confront not just the secrets she had kept, but the choices he would make moving forward. The tension was palpable. Mark knew the time was coming to face the truth head on. Mark sat there for what felt like hours, his hand still resting on Timmy's small shoulder. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unsaid words and emotions neither knew how to express. Mark's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. He had come here looking for answers, and now he had them. Answers that hurt, but also brought clarity. He realized that Sarah had found a way to fulfill her need to nurture, to care for someone. when their dreams of having their own child had slipped away. She had given Timmy the love and attention she couldn't give to a child of her own. And in doing so, she had created a bond that Mark hadn't been a part of. But now, standing on the edge of this new reality, Mark knew he had to make a choice. He could walk away, leave Timmy behind, and let the past stay buried with Sarah. Or he could honor her memory by stepping into the role she had left behind. Timmy shifted slightly, looking up at Mark with wide, expectant eyes. The boy didn't say a word, but the hope in his expression was undeniable. He was waiting for Mark to make his decision, waiting to know if he would have someone to care for him, or if he would be left alone once again. Mark's heart ached as he thought about everything Sarah had sacrificed to protect him from more pain. She had tried to handle it all on her own, never wanting to burden him. But now that he knew the truth, walking away felt impossible. This boy was a part of Sarah, and in some strange, unexpected way, he was a part of Mark too. "I'm sorry," Mark finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I didn't know about you sooner, Timmy. I wish I had." Timmy looked down, clutching his teddy bear even tighter. "It's okay," he whispered. "She told me you were a good man. She said you loved her." Mark felt a tear slip down his cheek as Timmy's words hit him. Sarah had believed in him, even when she was keeping this secret. She had trusted him, and now it was his turn to prove that he could live up to that trust. Taking a deep breath, Mark made his decision. "Timmy, I can't replace Sarah," he said softly. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be there for you. I don't know how to do this, but I'm willing to learn." Timmy's eyes lit up with a mixture of surprise and hope. "You mean, you want to be my family?" Mark nodded, feeling the weight of his decision settle into something that felt right. "Yeah, Timmy, if you'll have me, I'd like to try." For the first time since they had met, Timmy smiled. A small tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was a moment of quiet connection, a promise of something new, something different. Mark knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges. Ahead, moments of doubt and fear. But he also knew that this was what Sarah would have wanted. She had seen something in Timmy that Mark was only just beginning to understand. And now he had the chance to carry that forward. As Mark and Timmy left the orphanage together, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. He had come here looking for answers about Sarah, and what he had found was something much deeper. It wasn't just about the past. It was about the future and what he would do with the gift Sarah had left behind. She had shown him that family wasn't always defined by blood, but by love. And now it was up to him to build a new kind of family with Timmy. The drive home was quiet, but there was a newfound sense of peace in the air. Mark glanced over at Timmy, who was gazing out the window, still clutching his teddy bear. For the first time in a long time, Mark felt like he was on the right path, one that wasn't just about wealth or success, but about something much more meaningful. When they arrived at Mark's home, Timmy hesitated at the front door, as if unsure whether he belonged there. Mark knelt down beside him and smiled gently. "This is your home now too, Timmy. You don't have to be afraid." Timmy looked up at Mark, and for the first time, the fear in his eyes seemed to fade. He stepped inside, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, and Mark knew that this was the beginning of something new for both of them. As they settled in, Mark found himself thinking about Sarah. He missed her more than ever, but he also felt a sense of comfort, knowing that she had led him to this moment. Her love, her kindness, her ability to see beyond her own pain, those were the things that had guided him here. And now, in her absence, Mark would carry those qualities forward. He would be there for Timmy, just as Sarah had been, and in doing so, he would honor the memory of the woman he had loved. The story didn't end with Sarah's passing. It continued, in the life she had touched, in the love she had shared, and in the bond that was now forming between Mark and Timmy. As they sat together that evening, Mark knew that they had both been given a second chance, a chance to heal, to grow, and to build something new out of the pieces that Sarah had left behind. And that was the greatest gift of all.